The crossing of the Neman and the illusion of invincibility on the morning of June 24, 1812. One of the most extraordinary military spectacles in European history unfolded along the banks of the Neman River, marking the opening act of what would become Napoleon Bonaparte's most catastrophic campaign. The river, forming the western boundary of the Russian Empire, became the gateway through which the Grande Armée, an unprecedented coalition force drawn from nearly every corner of continental Europe, began its eastward march. More than an army, it was a political statement. French veterans marched beside Italians, Poles, Germans, Dutchmen, and reluctant contingents from Prussia and Austria, all unified under the imperial banner of Napoleon Bonaparte. Drums rolled, banners snapped in the wind, and tens of thousands of boots struck the earth in disciplined rhythm. To the soldiers crossing the bridges, the moment felt triumphant, almost ceremonial. Few imagined that this crossing marked not the beginning of conquest, but the opening step toward imperial collapse. Napoleon's soldiers expected resistance. They had been conditioned by years of warfare to believe that enemies would either stand and fight or collapse under pressure. Instead, the opposite occurred. Russian forces were nowhere to be seen. No defensive line, no grand confrontation, only empty roads, abandoned positions, and distant Cossack scouts observing from the shadows. For the French, this absence was puzzling but not alarming. Many interpreted it as weakness or fear. For the Russians, however, the crossing of the Neman marked the beginning of what they would soon call the Patriotic War, a struggle not merely for territory, but for national survival. The sheer scale of the Grande Armée defied precedent. Over 650,000 men and nearly 150,000 horses streamed eastward, accompanied by massive artillery trains and supply wagons that groaned under the strain of their own weight. Yet from the outset, cracks were already forming beneath the surface of this imperial machine. Supply depots were insufficient, roads were primitive, and the distances involved were far greater than anything Napoleon had previously encountered. Even before encountering major Russian forces, disease, exhaustion, and hunger began to erode the army's strength. Still, morale remained high. Officers and soldiers alike trusted in Napoleon's reputation as a military genius. Many believed that a single decisive battle would force Russia back into alliance and bring the campaign to a swift conclusion. Colonel Jean Boulart of the Imperial Guard later recalled the overwhelming confidence that permeated the ranks. Despite the uncertainty ahead, he wrote, enthusiasm was everywhere, fueled by unwavering belief in the emperor's destiny. Such confidence, however, rested on assumptions shaped by past victories, assumptions that would prove dangerously flawed in the vast spaces of the Russian Empire. Behind the spectacle lay years of escalating political, economic, and ideological tension between France and Russia. The roots of the conflict stretched back to Napoleon's continental system, an ambitious attempt to cripple Britain by enforcing a Europe-wide trade blockade. While devastating for British commerce, in theory, the policy inflicted severe economic damage on Napoleon's allies and satellite states, Russia included. Russian ports suffered, the ruble depreciated sharply, and resentment grew within the Russian elite. Although the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807 had temporarily aligned France and Russia, it was an alliance built on convenience rather than trust. Ideological differences further widened the rift. Napoleon viewed himself as the architect of a rational, modern Europe, governed by uniform laws and revolutionary principles. Tsar Alexander I, by contrast, saw himself as the defender of traditional monarchy and divine order. While the two men exchanged flattering correspondence and met in grand diplomatic ceremonies, mutual suspicion simmered beneath the surface. By 1810, Russia openly violated the continental system, signaling that war was no longer a question of if, but when. Thus, as the Grande Armée crossed the Neman under clear summer skies, Europe stood at a turning point. What appeared to be the opening act of another imperial triumph was, in reality, the beginning of a conflict that would reshape the continent, redefine warfare, and expose the limits of even the greatest military power of the age. Strategy, retreat, and the Russian refusal to fight on Napoleon's terms. From the moment the Grande Armée entered Russian territory, it became clear that the campaign would not follow the familiar pattern Napoleon expected. Rather than offering battle near the frontier, Russian commanders implemented a strategy that defied conventional military logic and Napoleon's personal instincts. The Russian high command, divided and often uncertain, ultimately chose strategic withdrawal over immediate confrontation. This decision, though deeply unpopular among officers and soldiers alike, reflected a calculated effort to exploit Russia's geography and deny the invaders a decisive engagement. Russian forces were divided into multiple field armies, with the two largest, the First Western Army under Barclay de Tolly and the Second Western Army under Prince Pyotr Bagration, tasked with delaying the French advance while avoiding encirclement. The plan was dangerous and politically risky. Every mile of retreat meant surrendering territory without a fight, fueling criticism at court and undermining morale within the ranks. Many officers viewed the withdrawal as dishonorable, a betrayal of military tradition. Yet strategically, it served a crucial purpose. It stretched French supply lines and bought time. Napoleon, for his part, struggled to adapt. His operational plans were deliberately flexible, reflecting uncertainty about Russian intentions. He spoke of marching on Moscow, threatening St. Petersburg, or destroying the Russian armies in a single blow. What united these options was his belief that decisive battle remained the key to victory. The longer the Russians avoided such a confrontation, the more Napoleon's strategic framework began to unravel. As French forces advanced through Lithuania and into the interior, they encountered not victory, but emptiness. Towns were abandoned, warehouses destroyed, and bridges burned. Russian commanders implemented scorched earth tactics with increasing intensity, depriving the Grande Armée of local resources. What little food remained was often seized by starving soldiers, further alienating the civilian population. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion spread rapidly, and discipline began to fray. The logistical challenges proved devastating. Napoleon's army, designed to live off the land during fast-moving campaigns, found itself in an environment incapable of sustaining such massive numbers. Roads disintegrated into mud under constant traffic. Horses died by the tens of thousands, crippling artillery and supply transport. Each lost animal amplified the crisis, forcing soldiers to carry heavier loads and abandon equipment. Meanwhile, internal friction plagued the French command structure. Allied contingents marched reluctantly, motivated more by obligation than loyalty. Communication barriers and cultural tensions undermined coordination. Even within Napoleon's inner circle, doubts emerged. Some advisors warned that Russia's vast distances and hostile environment made the campaign fundamentally different from anything they had faced before. Yet Napoleon pressed on. He believed that persistence alone would force the Russians to fight. Each retreat reinforced his conviction that the enemy was on the brink of collapse. In reality, Russian forces were regrouping, preserving their strength, and waiting for the invaders to exhaust themselves. The strategic withdrawal, though costly in morale and territory, gradually shifted the balance of power. By early July, the illusion of an easy victory had faded. While the Grande Armée still appeared formidable on paper, its effective strength diminished daily. The Russians, though battered and internally divided, had succeeded in redefining the war on their own terms. The campaign had become a test of endurance rather than brilliance, a test that increasingly favored the defenders. Smolensk, Borodino, and the blood price of a decisive battle approximately equals 1,000 words. The first major clash of the campaign came at Smolensk in August 1812, offering Napoleon what he believed might finally be the decisive engagement he sought. The ancient city, fortified and strategically important, stood as a symbolic gateway to the Russian heartland. When French forces approached, Russian troops initially defended the city, igniting fierce urban combat. Artillery bombardments set Smolensk ablaze, and civilians fled amid chaos and destruction. Yet once again, the Russians refused to commit fully. After inflicting heavy casualties, they withdrew, leaving the city in ruins but their army intact. Smolensk was a psychological blow. Napoleon had captured territory, but not victory. The destruction shocked even seasoned veterans, foreshadowing the devastation yet to come. Still, Napoleon pressed on, convinced that Moscow lay within reach and that its capture would force Russia to negotiate. That belief culminated in the Battle of Borodino in September, a confrontation that would become one of the bloodiest single-day battles of the entire Napoleonic Wars. Both sides prepared for a struggle of unprecedented intensity. Russian forces entrenched themselves along defensive lines, determined at last to stand and fight. For Napoleon, Borodino represented the long-awaited opportunity to destroy the Russian army in open battle. The fighting was brutal beyond description. Infantry assaults surged forward under relentless artillery fire. Entire divisions were shattered in minutes. Casualties mounted at a horrifying pace as both armies fought with desperation and resolve. By day's end, tens of thousands lay dead or wounded. The battlefield was littered with broken weapons, abandoned cannons, and bodies piled upon bodies. Yet even Borodino failed to deliver a decisive outcome. Though the French technically held the field, the Russian army withdrew in good order, preserving its core fighting strength. Napoleon, exhausted and unwell, hesitated to commit his Imperial Guard, the last reserve that might have tipped the balance. The opportunity, if it existed at all, slipped away. Borodino marked a turning point not because it was a clear victory, but because it exposed the limits of Napoleonic warfare. Never before had Napoleon fought a battle that yielded so little strategic gain at such immense cost. The Russian army lived on, and the road to Moscow lay open, but victory remained elusive. Moscow, fire, and the collapse of strategic purpose. When Napoleon entered Moscow in mid-September, he expected negotiations. Instead, he found silence. The city had been largely abandoned, its population gone, its streets eerily empty. Within days, fires erupted across Moscow, consuming entire districts. Whether set deliberately or sparked by chaos, the effect was catastrophic. The city Napoleon hoped would sustain his army and force peace became a smoldering ruin. With winter approaching, Moscow offered neither shelter nor supplies. Napoleon waited, convinced that political reality would compel the Russian leadership to negotiate. Weeks passed, no envoys arrived. The emperor remained trapped by his own assumptions, reluctant to retreat yet unable to advance. Meanwhile, discipline collapsed. Soldiers looted what little remained, scavenging among the ashes. Food shortages worsened. Horses died in staggering numbers. The army that had marched triumphantly across Europe now faced starvation at the heart of Russia. Strategic purpose evaporated. Napoleon no longer dictated events. He reacted to them. When the decision to retreat finally came in October, it was already too late. Winter closed in, and the long road west became a corridor of suffering and death. Retreat, annihilation, and the end of the Napoleonic myth. The retreat from Moscow ranks among the greatest military disasters in history. Russian forces harassed the withdrawing columns relentlessly. Partisan attacks, ambushes, and constant pressure turned retreat into rout. As temperatures plunged, frostbite and exposure claimed thousands. Entire units disintegrated. The crossing of the Berezina River became a symbol of the army's destruction. Amid chaos, ice, and enemy fire, survivors fought desperately to escape encirclement. Though Napoleon managed to preserve fragments of his force, the Grande Armée ceased to exist as an effective fighting army. By the time the remnants crossed back over the frontier, fewer than 100,000 men remained. The myth of invincibility was shattered. Across Europe, subject states sensed weakness. Coalitions formed. Within 2 years, Napoleon would be defeated, exiled, and removed from power. The 1812 campaign was more than a military failure, was a lesson in the limits of ambition. It demonstrated that conquest cannot substitute for legitimacy, and that geography, climate, and national resistance can defeat even the greatest armies. For the United States audience today, the invasion of Russia stands as a timeless reminder. Power without restraint invites catastrophe, and empires often fall not in a single moment, but through a series of fatal mistakes.